All right, today we have a special episode. Today we've got Max Browne, former USC and Pitt quarterback, now does some work with the Pac-12 Network. Appreciate you taking some time out of your day with us.
Of course, man. Always down to chat ball. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So you're a Pac-12 guy. We all woke up this morning and we found out that Stanford and Cal are heading to the ACC. Obviously, Oregon and Washington, USC, and UCLA are heading to the Big Ten. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah heading to the Big 12. Pac-12 is pretty much dead at this point, right?
I think so. I'm still. I have yet to really read anything. I've only read the headline. We're filming this on the Friday morning of the announcement on West Coast time, so I'm just getting in. I haven't. I'm interested to see some of the financials and how that all played out. But yeah, I mean, a weird time. I think. Yeah, I mean, what do Oregon State and Washington State do from here? I've heard rumblings that hey, they're in talks with the Big 12. To me, that's the best case scenario for those guys. I think maybe the more realistic scenario is a revamped, elevated Mountain West type of either whether it's a new conference or they head there. But yeah, man, to me it's that. I'm a West Coast dude, but I just my biggest takeaway is you're telling me 10 of the 12 Pac-12 schools found a home at a Power 4 conference now, yet they weren't able to find the money to keep together the Pac-12. It's a lot of millions. It's millions of dollars in buyout money from the ACC, from the Big 12, from the Big 10. And you're telling, and who's funding that money? The TV networks. And you're telling me they couldn't find a way to get a Pac-10 deal? That one to me is still a head scratcher.
What to you was the biggest downfall with the Pac-12 over the past, year? Because it wasn't that long ago where USC and UCLA said that they were heading for the Big Ten. Last summer, is when they made that announcement. You talk back to last June, nobody even has this on their radar.
The biggest factor to me, I think, timing, which was somewhat uncontrollable, or at least to the current management, that really hurt the Pac-12. What do I mean by that? They made a deal in 2010. The landscape of streaming and social media changed substantially over that 3 to 4 year period. And I think if that deal was made in 2014, 2015, that original Pac 12 Media Networks deal, um, they may have had a different lens, right? That was very much the culture of let's keep everything behind a paywall. That's when, man, everyone's social media was private and all that. And content was not where it's at now, where it's, hey, everyone needs to see it. The value of eyeballs and exposure. I think we're aware of it now. We were not as aware of it back then. And by not having a strong relationship with Fox or ESPN, I think that hurt the overall reputation of the conference. I think timing again by the Big 12's negotiations coming before the Pac 12, I think that was detrimental because it felt like there was only room for one of those deals with ESPN. The Big 12 nabbed it first. The Pac 12 was sitting second, not because the Pac 12 was behind the Big 12. That's one big misconception. If anything, the Pac 12 was ahead of the Big 12 in 2021. That is a fact. And if you say otherwise, that's not an informed opinion. The Big 12 was scrambling. The Pac 12 just didn't pounce on the Big 12. The Pac 12 should have expanded and used that window to acquire some of those Big 12 teams. But what happened is SC and maybe other more institutional voices in the Pac 12 room said, nah, we don't need to expand. We're all good. Like we're fine. We're the conference of champions, all that. And they didn't take advantage of when the Big 12 was down. And as a result, Big 12 gets a new commissioner. They expand 4 teams. They get BYU and UCF. They kind of right the ship. They get stability, the whole deal. And then sure enough, 12 months later, they're the ones pouncing on the Pac-12. So timing to me, I know that's not a concrete like blaming a person or anything like that, but I think that looking back, this whole dynamic could be a lot different if the contract windows were at a different timetable. Looking back really the past 15 years or so.
I remember a time where this would have been about 2010, 2011. Texas was almost heading to the Pac-12. There was a period of time where Texas and Texas Tech and Oklahoma State were all going to the Pac-12 and creating that first super conference. And then Texas decided that they weren't going to, and nobody else wanted to go with if Texas wasn't going.
Dude, that's like, I think about that often. I mean, that 2011 window that you're referring to of right around the time the Pac-12 Networks was established and kind of the new look digital age is upon us. And Texas and Oklahoma, like you said, we're in conversations to come over to the Pac-12. Obviously, that's when Colorado and Utah came around. But yeah, I mean, that's when the Pac-12 did not take a backseat to really anyone. I mean, I guess, yeah, SEC from a football lens, but still the Pac-12 had that prestige. And then it wasn't until the next decade, of course, where it lost that. But yeah, man, it would have been totally different if Texas and Oklahoma came over. I mean, obviously the Pac-12 would not be where it is right now, but it would have been interesting to see the ripple effect to that of the Big Ten. It feels like over the past 7 years, the Big Ten has solidified itself as that like number 2 conference. Nowadays, maybe they argue they're at that number 1B slot, but the number 2 conference. But in 2011, that was not the case. I mean, Ohio State was not the brand it is now. Michigan was not the football brand it is right now. It'd be Penn State too, obviously, with the terrible stuff that they went down there. So, yeah, man, woulda, coulda, shoulda type of deal with that. It's crazy. It's laughable almost now to think that was a possibility back then, but that was a missed one for sure.
Yeah, 2011, Ohio State was coming off a scandal. Michigan had Rich Rodriguez or Brady Hoke at that point. Either way, they weren't doing very well. Penn State was going through their own scandal. You know, the 3 biggest teams in the conference were probably at their basement that they've been in the last 30 years. And the Pac-12, you know, Oregon, you know, you're talking about the Chip Kelly, you know, nearly winning a national championship. You've got Utah joining the conference at that point, and you had USC, who had been very good over the last, 15 years. And then you had sporadic other teams that were doing very well, you know, different pockets where, you know, you'd have a UCLA or an Arizona State or a Washington that would rise up for a little bit. But you had consistent teams that were in the top 10 compared to other conferences.
Yeah, a big what if for me in this whole thing, even bigger than the Pac-12, is if Texas and USC had never never slowed, like if they continued to play at that blue blood era during that 2010 to 2020 window, where are we now? That to me is a big window because those, you could argue, I mean, 2005, they played in a national championship game. I think at that point, people would say those are the 2 biggest programs in college football, period. And now it's kind of crazy to think that because now it's Alabama. Now you made Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, whatever. I think USC fans might take offense to that. But I say that in the context of the power dynamic shifted tremendously to the SEC. And the SEC's always been different. I'm not naive to that. But when I grew up in the 2010s or 2000s, it wasn't like, oh, my gosh, we're playing an SEC team. We're absolutely screwed. Like that was not the connotation. And I think a big reason why that narrative has shifted is because Texas and USC took their foot off the gas, obviously for different reasons. But this whole dynamic, I think, would be a lot different landscape-wise if those 2 teams were elite.
Yeah. And, you know, you made a point earlier about, you know, the Pac-12 making sure that they didn't put the precedent or put the priority on making sure that they got the eyeballs on. And I know there's a running joke with the Pac-12 network is that if you live on the East Coast, it's so hard to get. You know, I paid an extra $7 a month just to make sure that I was able to get extra channels, and one of them was a Pac-12 network. But like, not every streaming service offers the Pac-12 network. It just didn't seem like they had the deals and the availability for everybody across the country to watch the Pac-12 network. And then, of course, last weekend, one of the biggest games is USC. You've got Caleb Williams on TV, and almost nobody has the availability to watch it on the East Coast when everybody wants to watch it. Everybody's dying for the sport. And Caleb Williams is on TV, one of the biggest stars of the last 10 years, and it's harder to see him.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and shoot, it's unfortunate for your audience because I was hosting the pre-half and post-game show, so you missed out on.
Hey, I got a picture of it.
There you go. Yeah, I appreciate that. But yeah, I think. I mean, again, I think this is actually a bigger conversation than just college football. I think it shows how our society has shifted with our view on content and social media and what is privacy and all that. Again, in 2010, shoot, I was a sophomore in high school. I remember the connotation. Everyone had their Facebooks were private and it was very secluded. And the Pac-12 networks and other people, you hide your content, or other groups, you hide your content behind a paywall. There was very much that narrative versus now it's, hey, let me put out content for free. Eyeballs is the most important thing. And then I'll run ads on the back end of that. That thought process is very fundamental now. That was not the case 13 years ago. And I think it just shows a bigger picture technological shift. And again, I think if the Pac-12 had made a media negotiations deal in 2015 and not 2011, 2010, I think the optics of that deal, especially with having a direct TV relationship, would have been a lot different.
I think one of the other things you're going to see come out of all of this realignment has nothing to do with football. It's going to have to do with every other sport, because you saw some, Olympic sports with their athletes coming out and making statements after Oregon and Washington were going to the Big Ten. I'm sure you'll see it with Cal and Stanford, that all of a sudden your volleyball players, your women's basketball team, your tennis team, Cal's now going to have to travel across the country for every single game. Do you think that in 5-10 years we're going to relook at this whole conversation and it's going to be, here's football and then here's every other sport?
It's kind of, to me, there's two parts to that question. Yes, I definitely think it's going to be here's football and here's every other kind of sport. Whether that looks like a dedicated college football playoff commissioner and it's like its own league, I think there's possibilities there, but we have a long way to get there. I mean, to get the ACC, the Big Ten, whatever the future mold is of the Pac-12, the SEC, the Big 12, to all agree on one leader and one kind of institution, we're a long ways away from that. I think just because this current standing and the leverage that I think each conference has is completely different. Would not have said that 7 years ago. I think the standing was a lot more equal. So we have a long ways to go there. But it's interesting. I actually think I'm not naive to the mental health component and some of the concerns there with travel, but I actually think in the grand scheme of things, I think that's a fun talking point. It's something that a lot of people use. I think when push comes to shove, though, that's an issue that is solvable. Whether that is having, for lack of a better term, like swim meets for the Olympic sports and having everyone congregate at one location and being much more intentional and strategic with the scheduling. Again, I know it's not ideal to not have in-person classes. I know it's not ideal for Cal's volleyball team to spend 3 consecutive weeks in North Carolina or something. But I think it's actually workable and swingable, and I think we've seen that with the work from home movement, just in bigger picture society. So I hope that a lot of the money that's getting allocated, especially for the new Big Ten schools, goes to supporting those students, right? So it's elite travel accommodations for the Washington women's basketball team. But again, it's a factor. It's not ideal for sure. But I'm more of the standpoint of I think it's more of just it's a fun talking point rather than a detrimental decision point for those teams.
We also see a bunch of different schools have affiliate memberships to different conferences as well for 1 or 2 specific sports, because if a conference doesn't have, wrestling, or if they don't have, tennis, where they join a different conference, which for them, maybe there could be a little bit more of that with a location base, especially depending on the sports, because West Coast, there's more, beach volleyball. In the North, you've got more hockey. I can't imagine USC is just going to start up a men's hockey program next year to play in the Big Ten. And I don't think that Michigan's going to be starting up a beach volleyball program.
It'll be fun to see. I know I'm from Seattle, and I know I saw a tweet the other day that obviously Seattle fans have received the Kraken over the past 5 years, and the UW club hockey team for the men's is like, it'd be sweet to get involved. Obviously they're many years away from even being competitive. That's a unique angle, but you're spot on. And again, I just think it's an issue. It's a factor, but I think there are creative solutions to keep those teams playing competitive games. And to me, the bigger issue is just as we fast forward 10 years and things get more driven by men's basketball and men's football, just what's the ripple effect for that for, all the non-money making sports, especially when this is a big thought I have. If we fast forward 5 years from now and another iteration of conference realignment happens and Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State wake up and say, why are we giving the same share of everything to Purdue and Rutgers and Illinois and those types of schools? And then they say, hey, why don't we brand together with the top tier of the SEC schools? And that money is even double what it is now. And then what's the ripple effect of that for Purdue's women's teams? And as we keep going down, this snowball effect's not ending. It might take 25 years to fully settle, but it's not done. And it'll just be interesting to track how it plays out.
No, you're right, because people think college football has been around, since 1869 or whatnot, but what college football is now has really only been around for 25 to 50 years, depending how you want to view it. The BCS really brought in a new iteration of what college football looked like. The college football playoff, even more than that. The playoffs only been around since 2014. The BCS has only been since 98. Before that, you still had ties in football in the 90s. This game is going to continue to change over the next 10, 15, 20 years, where you're going to look back in 10 years and you're almost not even going to recognize what the system looks like. And I know there's a lot of people that want to have the nostalgia of, the college football, how it was built. Problem is the dollars are going to win out over nostalgia.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think I'm optimistic. The long tail that I think works for everyone that I'm hopeful we can get to. And I'm not a soccer guy, so if you are or some of your listeners are, that you'll know better than me. But I think a relegation model would be so amazing for college football. And the top tier schools, the USCs, the Alabamas, the Michigans, the Ohio States, I think they could benefit from that, because if you're so good, you should never flirt with being relegated. And that, let's say it's the top 50 teams make tier 1 and then the bottom 50 make like tier 2 or whatever. And you have a game late in November of school 45 versus 52 to get in. That's a random game nowadays that could be must-watch TV in a future evolution of college football. If it's must-watch TV between Arizona State and Iowa, for example, the money that could drive, if the top tier schools, the Alabamas and the USCs, could get a portion of that, or like indirectly get a portion of that, because the pool has obviously increased. That to me would be amazing. It speaks to what you mentioned about, hey, does football potentially kind of break off into its own business model? But that to me would be amazing. That to me would give schools like an Oregon State and a Washington State, who are right now on the outside looking in, a chance to stay competitive and stay relevant. And I just think that would be amazing for the sport. And I think financially there's a world where it makes sense too.
I know that I would love that. I think it's getting everybody to buy in on that. As much as Ohio State and USC and Alabama and Georgia, I think, would love to do that. I think there's still a portion of their brain that's going to say, we don't want to get relegated. Like, how can we avoid to do that? But like you said, with the amount of money that they have, amount of resources they have, their facilities, their coaches, there's no reason why those programs should ever even be flirting, especially if it's like 50 teams. And I think as fans, it's just more great football for us to watch. Like you said, it's the random games that we're going to want to see on a Saturday. We had tons of people last weekend tuning in to watch, who was it? UTEP, and I forget who else was playing. But it was a random game, but it was on TV. People wanted to watch, and it was good.
Yeah, at the end of the day, the money's got to make sense. And I guess maybe I'm just being optimistic, but I think there's a world where, again, like, if those games that are relatively random November games end up deciding teams' fates, like, I mean, I'm not tuning in necessarily to the Wake Forest Virginia game, but if that has something on the line, like, that's must watch TV on the West Coast, and it'd just be fun. And again, this is all through the context of, if another 5-7 years from now there's another conference shift. Like, if we all think this is heading towards 2 conferences, which was what I feel like every talk show host was saying a year ago, it's only a matter of time before we're 2 conferences. It's only a matter of time. Well, right now, from the national perspective, we're at like 4, I guess you could say. So some shift has to happen to get 2. If you're saying what you said last year, another shift has to happen. I think that happens in 5 years. And how that shakes out, I think will hurt teams that are stoked right now with their standing.
Yeah. Now, before I let you out of here, I want one thing about this upcoming weekend. We talked about the Pac-12, but since we are heading into week 1, give me one thing that we need to watch for in the Pac-12 this weekend.
One thing we need to watch for in the Pac-12, the Colorado Buffaloes, man. To me, they're the most I'm going to learn the most in that game than any game in the country. Colorado at TCU. TCU obviously in the college football playoff a year ago. I have never seen a bigger discrepancy between national media and local media, what I'll call West Coast, with their view on Colorado. You listen to national media, it's like Colorado's getting headlines, and Colorado's going to make a bowl game, and hey, Coach Prime's got them going. You listen to West Coast media and people that cover the Pac-12, we're thinking Colorado's a 3-4 win team, and so someone's going to be wrong. And I just don't know a lot about that Colorado roster with all the transfers they had. So tune in there. I'm fascinated to see now that hype season's over and it's time to go play ball, how Colorado shakes out.
Incredibly unprecedented to basically turn over the whole roster in 1 year. I think he kept basically 14 players from last year, 70 something transfers. It's unprecedented. Either people are going to find out that it works and want to try to do it as well, or you're going to find out that it flops because you still need to have some sort of continuity. You can't just bring in a whole new roster every year and hope that it works.
Will be interesting. Yeah, I mean, we said that about Lincoln Riley last year, and for the most part, he made it work. I know they lost to Tulane at the end of the year, but yeah, Coach Prime took it to a whole nother gear with his conference turnover or his roster turnover. But hey, that was a terrible Colorado roster last year. So in some sense, you kind of had to do it. But again, I recognize a lot of the names and a lot of the recruits on that roster, but very interested to see how it actually all plays out on the field.
I know I'll be tuning in. Big noon kickoff for Fox. I'm very curious to see how Prime does, and I know that's probably going to end up being one of the highest rated games because everybody's going to want to see how Prime does in his first game at the FBS level.
And it could be sneaky too, because TCU obviously in the national championship game a year ago, but they were kind of a team of destiny. So you'd like to think they take a step back, at least in some capacity. Mm-hmm. And so maybe that's a game that you sneak up on. I know I really like that Vegas line. I think it's like at 21 right now. Mm-hmm. Colorado getting 21. That's a line I like.
And TCU is replacing a lot. Quarterback, running back, a lot on the defense. Same thing. They had to fill a lot of gaps. So we don't know much about either team. So it could be an incredibly exciting game.
It'll be fun. What else? I mean, we got Utah last night too. Washington, Boise State will be interesting. But yeah, it's very.
Oregon State, San Jose State could be an interesting one on Sunday as well.
Yeah, I expect Oregon State to take care of business. San Jose State's offense showed explosion last weekend, but I'm excited for DJU, man. DJU. I think I called his transfer back in December a year ago. I was like, dude, Oregon State would be a perfect fit for him. And I think that offense takes a lot of pressure off of him. And don't sleep on if you're someone on the East Coast listening to this, don't sleep on Oregon State. There's a reason they're ranked 17 right now. They got a lot of people coming back.
I like what they have. I think they're also out to prove something, which is basically being left out. I think they're kind of hearing the noise, and they're going to try to be proving that they also belong, in a Power 5 conference and prove that they can play good football as well.
The Pac-12 is loaded, man. I mean,
yeah.
Utah took care of business of an SEC school with their backup quarterback. Utah right now is the 4th team projected in the conference. Ute fans, rightfully so, can take a lot of offense to that. You can make the argument they should be favored. Defense is legit. Hopefully Cam Rising gets healthy. That's a huge storyline out west. What is going on with Cam Rising's knee here in the next few weeks?
Yeah. Well, Max, I appreciate you taking some time out of the day today to talk about the Pac-12, a little bit of preview for the weekend. Would love to have you on again in the future, but enjoy the weekend.
It's fun, man. I'll be in Tucson calling Arizona's game, so tune in for that. And yeah, always down to chat ball. Enjoy the guess it's kind of the first weekend, but really the second weekend of college football.
First full weekend slate, we'll call it.
There you go. I'll take that. Enjoy it.
Awesome. Thank you, Max.